Hey, folks. Welcome back to the Mac and Mike Show. I'm Mac. He's Mike. Never the twain shall meet. And we're going to take the easy way out this week because I've had a really crappy week from a number of different perspectives. And very honestly, we were supposed to do this yesterday, and I kind of bagged out of it because I didn't have time. But today, Mike and I were managed to get together remotely, and we're going to talk about one of our favorite subjects, that is Donald Trump. We'll just talk briefly about the kind of week that Donald Trump had because it was pretty impressive. So, Mike, do you have any particular Donald Trump stories you want to tell, or you want me to get started?
You get started, buddy.
Well, Monday, it is expected that the Fed is going to, guess what? Lower interest rates, maybe a quarter, maybe half a point, something like that. The guy who's in charge of the Fed was just out this week saying what a tremendous jobs report we have, and we probably don't need the interest rates as high as they are. So that's a good thing, right?
Yep.
Donald Trump visited the Fed and spoke to the director of the Fed, and it was kind of interesting that shortly after he visits, the director of the Fed, Powell, decides he's going to lower interest rates. You notice how Donald Trump has that effect on a number of people?
I do. And who was the woman that was on the Fed board that had to resign or told to resign?
Yeah, yeah, I don't remember her name, but yeah, yeah.
So
So, Donald Trump, for some reason, and I don't know why, two things on the national security front happened this week. One, Secretary Hesketh fired the director of the DIA, the director of the intelligence, the military intelligence agency, and defense intelligence. I said director, trying to spit out the right words. The director of intelligence, DIA, from the military was fired, and also interestingly enough, John Bolton's home was raided by the FBI, supposedly looking for classified information. Does that sound kind of familiar with both President Biden and President Trump
yeah.
of the past?
Well, interestingly enough, Jesse Waters, he was cautioning, and who knows what kind of insider information some of these guys have. He was
Right.
cautioning, saying, don't assume that it's just about classified information. It may be about a lot more than that. So I'm a wait and see kind of guy. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I know. You never want to commit until everything's already defined to the nth degree. You don't get into the gravel, Mike. You get into the grains of sand. And that's one of the things I appreciate about you. I'm usually taking a 30,000 foot view, and I'm ready to rock and roll when the indications are, and you're never ready to criticize or to go along with the crowd until you know for sure. And that's a good trait.
well, that's a good subject actually to just talk about for a minute. Um, our mutual friend Brent, he's never looking at the other side of any story. It doesn't matter if it's politics or UFOs or ancient, you know, giant skeletons. Doesn't matter. And recently he was in a bad accident on a motorcycle. Won't go into details, but we were on the phone and he said, well, motorcycles have no higher risk than cars for accidents. Well, I got into Grok and Gemini and started doing my research. And yeah, it's obvious, right, to most people that that's a lie. But see, within the motorcycle community, they keep revisiting this lie. And it's a lie. It's up to 2,800% to 3,000% higher risk of death, 1,000 some percent same with injury, and 2,800 times more likely to have an accident. So it's it just shows that if you believe everything you first hear, you may go down the wrong path in so many ways. Now it's not as critical for you and I to sit here and hold an opinion whether John Bolton is about classified information or maybe dirty dealings in foreign countries, which I think is the other thing. But I think it's good to be a little more skeptical about everything we hear, whether it's from the left, right, or anywhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be about politics either. It can be
It's
about
always
motor.
good practice. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
And when you're talking about motorcycles, just on the surface, the first thing is that if you've ever driven in on the public highways and byways, you know that a motorcycle is more difficult to see, to pick up, to recognize that it's there. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out why. It's a whole lot smaller than an automobile. And sometimes, depending on the color of the motorcycle, color of the clothes that are wearing, they can blend into the background fairly easily. Now, most motorcycles do drive with their lights on, but even then, it's difficult. And if the motorcycle community didn't believe there was a problem with people running in motorcycles, they wouldn't have invented those yard signs you see everywhere that say "Watch for motorcycles."
right.
Nobody pays money to have yard signs made if there's not a problem.
Yeah, and there's two quick things. If you're over 50, you're more likely. You would think young hotheads would be more likely, but
Yep.
they're zooming in and out between lanes. But it's actually over 50, our reflex is slow. And the place that motorcyclists need to be careful, most accidents happen at intersections,
Yep.
which is what happened with, our buddy Brent.
Yeah.
So anyway, just a caution to our friends because I know guys, I love guys that are in motorcycle clubs, and it's a big thing in the VFW, the military community.
Yep.
So I don't want to dissuade anyone from enjoying life. They may as well, but enjoy life with facts and just be a little more cautious. That's all.
Like any other activity, know the risk and weigh them before you make your decision about whether or not you participate. And
Yep.
you're right. Both in the VFW and the American Legion, I know a lot of riders who they do a lot of good things for various charities, etc. They're very generous with their time and their fundraising. So yeah,
Yep.
good folks generally.
Right.
The
So
other
anyway,
the other thing Trump did recently, you notice that Trump is making significant inroads into the business community as far as their support for his policies. You notice that the stock market is up. I know my 401k is up dramatically
oh, mine's up big time.
over the past few weeks, and all that is due to Trump and his successes. One of the things I think is interesting. He's trying to bring these chip makers to America, right? I mean, the largest chip maker in the world, who makes the high-end, very capable chips, is on the island of Taiwan, and we know that because of a number of various reasons that the island of Taiwan is under some threat, some level of threat. I don't want to quantify it, but some level of threat from mainland China because, for a number of reasons, you could look them up. But one of the funniest, I think, is they don't have enough young women because of their one child policy for so many years. They don't have enough young women to marry their young men, which I think is just hilarious. The unintended consequences of political decisions. But with this decision that Trump is trying to get chip makers to manufacture in America, he's actually offering certain incentives, tax breaks and seed money and all that kind of things and instead of making it a loan, he's broached the idea of the United States of America getting equity in these companies that are moving to the United States, that are moving to North America. And I'm not real sure how I feel about that because that sounds a little bit like socialism, right? A little bit
Yeah.
like a communist solution. But by the same token, if the United States of America is an equity holder in the factory or the location or whatever you want to call it, doesn't that make it a whole lot harder for them to move somewhere else? I mean, doesn't that secure the jobs and secure the technology here? I don't have enough information about it to make an informed decision, but I think it's a very interesting idea, and I have to turn it around in my brain a little bit to find out where I stand on it. Do you have an opinion?
Well, for a long time, we've had private public partnerships, so I think, if you're going to invest, us as the taxpayers who we own the country, uh, yeah, you might be beholden to the taxpayers instead of, you know, in a socialist country, it's usually like an oligarchy, or in China, a gang of
Like,
eight, and the elites that own it. In America, it would be like the citizens own it. So it's not exactly the same type of, socialist order. And private public partnerships have worked in the past, and they
yes.
can be of great benefit. Um, so I'm all for trying new things. I think it was Ross Perot way back in the day said, there's a lot of good ideas floating around. What we need to do is try some of them. And if they don't work, you can always go back to doing what you were doing before. So if they build into it some way of breaking it off and saying, okay, this didn't work, and have an exit strategy like a lot of companies do, maybe that would be the way to proceed. That's my thought.
Well, we'll see. On the Democrat front, Kamala Harris is running around trying to get everybody to buy her new book, and book sales are atrocious so far.
Yeah, I mean that's a joke. The loser, she's gonna write a book, and I don't know who it's going to inspire. But I want to back up to one quick thing you said about China. Did you see this week that they've developed an artificial womb?
Yes.
And so that's how they're going to try and solve their one child problem. Lord knows if that takes off, women won't have to get pregnant anymore. You might see big change. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but yeah, Kamala Harris on the Democrat issue, it's just so funny to me. They're struggling so hard to find a foothold. You saw yesterday how that third way, which is funded by the governor of Illinois' sister or something,
Hmm.
think tank is trying to get the Democrats to stop using certain verbiage.
Yes.
The thing that I want to warn people about
Wordplay.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't matter if you change the verbiage. The ideas are still going to be there. So if you're a Republican listening to this or independent, and you think the Democrats are coming around, they're not coming around. They're just trying to find a new way to present their bad ideas.
Talking about Democrats and bad ideas, I sent you a clip by text of the rapper, the Canadian rapper McDonald.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you watch that?
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of his. He shows up on he's an American now, I guess, or at least he lives
Is
in
he?
America.
Okay, I
He's
thought he
from
was
Canada. He was a wrestler. Yeah, he's a great rapper.
a very interesting song about Gavin Newsom.
Being a
And I guess Gavin Newsom went on social media and called and said, "We don't care about McDonald. He's gay." And there's so many parts of this whole thing that is so hilarious. Like I thought the Democrats were supporters of gay rights, right? I mean, why would Gavin Newsom be so dismissive of if he was? And I don't
and
think he
no,
is.
he's not. He's married to a Rockefeller.
just I just
So
think it's a very interesting, way in which the Democrats do as I say, not as I do kind of thing.
yeah, his wife is a lovely woman.
Yeah. Well, I don't, that Donald Trump had Zelensky to the White House this past week.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, did you see the way President Zelensky was dressed when he got out of the limo?
Yeah, he had on a sport coat and everything. He didn't have on a tie, but he had on a sport coat.
Well, actually, the picture I saw, I'm pretty sure he did have a tie, but it was all
Oh,
black. Now, if you're the last time that Zelensky went to the White House, didn't he wear a T-shirt and blue jeans? And didn't the vice president say that was disrespectful to the United States?
yeah, I think it was
That's
a
what I
t-shirt and
remember.
some kind of fatigue pants, but anyway.
Yeah, I don't remember all the details, but I remember both the president and the vice president saying, that's not very respectful. You're in the Oval Office and you're dressed like some guy on the street. And I just thought it was interesting how, you know, Donald Trump did not tell him to wear a jacket. He didn't say wear a coat and tie. He didn't say that. Nobody said that. Nobody in the United States said you should wear a coat and tie when you come to the Oval Office. But they did say it was disrespectful to be dressed the way he was, and he changed. Does that surprise you?
No, not at all. I mean, he understands the position he's in, and I'm sure there's people that are in his inner circle that probably agreed. You know, he's trying. It's almost reminding you of Fidel Castro. Remember how Fidel always wore his fatigues?
Right.
It's like, okay, you're a wartime president, we get it, but it's almost like to the point of being what the kids would say, extra. When you constantly dress like that, you're trying to send a signal that doesn't need to be sent. We understand you're at war.
Yeah.
No need to, try and emphasize it any more than you already are.
Yep. Did you see Trump had both good news and bad news in the judicial front? Good news is he was told that he's allowed to deport the people he's trying to deport. The bad news is recently the judges ruled that he cannot withhold federal funds to sanctuary cities. Did you read that?
No, I didn't catch that one.
Well, I don't know that it'll stand. Obviously, they will appeal it to a higher court. But it's knowing knowing the way the law works. The legislative branch, specifically the House of Representatives, they allocate funds, but the administration is the arm by which the funds are delivered. The state, excuse me, not the state, but the House of Representatives, where all funding bills start from, and there's a reason for that in our Constitution. Those representatives are the ones that are closest to the voters, right? So it makes sense that if you're going to spend money, you want the voters to be able to have the greatest impact on what Congress is doing by voting them in or voting them out. And of course, the House of Representatives is the smallest district. The representatives are closest to the voters, to the citizens, et cetera. But um, now Trump wants to withhold money from sanctuary cities, and it's been taken to court. And at least at this level, I don't know what level, but the most recent court decision is, sorry, President Trump, you can't do that. How do you feel about money being withheld from sanctuary cities?
Well, on a moral, I can't speak to the legal issues. That's going to go up probably to the Supreme Court. And, the Supreme Court has a split decision. And I always have to remind my friends that law is really nothing more than a matter of opinion when it gets to that level. It's not like murder or this or that. It's going to be an opinion. So my opinion is that a president should have that authority. I didn't see the law. I don't know how it's written. For example, are the funds designated to particular things within the city or the city just itself? And the city has autonomy on how to spend the money. Or is some given
Well,
for
no, no,
infrastructure, some given for schools, some given for police?
right, right. The money is earmarked for specific projects or specific areas, but Trump wants, I think specifically the lawsuit was Los Angeles and Chicago. And, Trump is trying to withhold the money from there because they're sanctuary cities. And these cities have taken them to court. And at least at this level of the court, I think it was a circuit court. They said you can't do that. But, you know, uh, the Trump administration is not the only one who has trouble with these decisions, these policies that the Democrats are putting into place. I don't know if you saw, but this is related to Trump's administration. Bed Bath and Beyond is closing all their stores in California.
I think they already moved.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
said that the policies and the laws are there. It's impossible to have a profitable enterprise, and other stores have too. If you're like a Target or a CVS, and people come running in there and just rob you blind, and the police don't react unless it's more than $1,000. I think the laws have changed. I don't think it's $1,000 anymore. It's less, but you can't take those kind of losses multiple times in a month. So I I I tend to agree. If you're a sanctuary city, what you've in effect said is we are not going to follow federal law. Federal law specifically as it deals with immigration. The Constitution specifically and uniquely gives the federal government the responsibility for immigration. That's one of the few enumerated powers given to the federal government. And you'll hear me rant and rave on other policies that the government has done because they've stolen power that doesn't belong to them. But when it comes to immigration, it's clear that's a federal responsibility. And you know, when you choose to violate the law, and that's what these sanctuary cities are doing, they're basically saying, and some are so proud of it, they're like they do press conferences and
Yeah,
yeah,
Boston.
we're not going to cooperate with ICE, and we're not going to. These are our people. They're and there's a lot of bad people in that illegal immigration group. I'm not saying all of them are, but there are a lot of bad actors who are part of, gang members and, people from mental hospitals and people from, with criminal backgrounds that were in prison or were just released so they could come to America. And there are some good people too. And, that's going back to 2016 when Trump first said that coming down the escalator. There's some, and people never gave him credit for saying that. But listen, how many murders and rapes and how many crimes have illegal immigrants caused that we're aware of? Not doesn't include the ones we're not aware of. And I think that if sanctuary cities want to do that, then they ought to pay the price. That's my belief. And maybe you don't agree with me, maybe you don't feel the same way, but that's one of the areas that, and I hope that Donald Trump does get a win on that because I do believe that the only way to force these people to do the right thing, the only way to get these people to follow federal law is if you have some way of punishing them for not. Because listen, this is ego stuff, Um, Texas, as you know, is redistricting, and the Democratic world is up in arms. You can't redistrict. You're trying to steal votes. You're trying to underrepresent minority communities, and all of that is bullshit. Of course, I mean, the law is clear. You cannot disenfranchise a minority, a majority. How can I say this? A minority that is in the majority. In other words, if you have a certain minority group that represents 51% of the voters in a district, you can't change the district just to dilute the minority vote. That's against the law. Um, but that's not what they're doing. Um, the result of the redistricting is likely to mean more Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives. But what's so funny about that is that Texas is only doing what California and Illinois and New York, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, have already done. Hell, they've done it in Pennsylvania, Mike. They've
Yeah.
done it to us. Then that's why we have so many more Democrats in the state House of Representatives because of the redistricting that that our previous Democratic governor chose to do. And in California, they used to have an independent authority that did the redistricting, but they ended up with a majority of Democratic districts. Now, what they're trying to do is the state legislature in California just passed a law to do the redistricting without the independent agency, even though something like 70% of the people in California voted for this independent district drawing the lines, this independent agency. So they're going to get rid of even more Republicans, the few that they have in the various districts that are Republican held in California. It's crazy. It's crazy. And of course, you know that Donald Trump is asking for a new census, even though it's not census time. He's asking for a new census, which I do think will go to the Supreme Court before it's all said and done.
Yeah. Well, back to your sanctuary city discussion. Yeah, I of course would love to see uh, the president be able to withhold funds. That's a no brainer. I'm just saying there's Mike Kelly's personal opinion. then there's my view on the law and how it's written. And I stand in ignorance when it comes to that. So that's what I have a lot of questions about it. But
Michael, you're not in ignorance in anything. You're a bright guy. Got a
yeah,
lot of
well, ignorance just means lack of knowledge. It's not that I'm stupid, it's just I haven't looked into it. So, anyway, the other part that I would caveat into that is what he's doing with DC and taking it to the other cities. So, okay, let's say you won't cooperate with illegal immigration. Well, we send in the feds and the guard under the auspices, since it's a federal jurisdiction. You therefore should have the legal right, I would think, to send in the guard and FBI and all the other federal agencies
marshals.
massively into the cities under the auspices of finding the illegal immigrants. And while they're there, that would do what it's doing in DC and free up the police to go into the worst sections and clean up the criminals there. Because I know the police in these big cities, look, my grandfather was a New York City beat cop. I can tell you if he was alive today, I know the cops. They want to do the job. They despise, I mean, the police unions are all behind Trump. They want to do a good job. They're mad at the politicians, the prosecutors that won't prosecute, and the judges that won't hold people accountable. They feel like, okay, we do all this work, we put our lives at risk just to have the person turned back out in the street the next day. Makes no sense. So therefore, they start to get this attitude. I'm not even going to show up because they're just going to let the guy out the next day.
Yeah.
Crime statistics
Yeah.
seem like they're going down because of police apathy.
Why arrest them only to have
Yeah,
the DA and the court system set them free the next day? Now, I do want to draw a distinction between Washington D.C., the District of Columbia, and these other large sanctuary cities that we're talking about, because these other large sanctuary cities obviously belong to the states and not to the District of Columbia is truly a unique and special case.
sure.
And the federal government has the responsibility for the jurisdiction of Washington D.C. Now, a previous administration, I think it was 1973, gave this Columbia home rule charter, but I look at that and I look at it as being a failed experiment. They tried giving Washington D.C. Their ability to manage their own affairs, and they failed miserably at doing that. You don't have to be a genius; all you have to do is look around the city. And since Trump has taken it over, it has gotten exponentially cleaner and safer. That's not hyperbole. That's not an opinion. That is a fact. And it's just I don't think the people that live there want to live with that kind of crime around. Now, what I do think the Trump administration should do is this: they should they should create a federal law, and I don't know how to write it, but I'm sure that there's lawyers somewhere that know how to write this law that basically say this: if law enforcement in states and cities are ordered not to support federal law enforcement agencies in in the prosecution of their duties, that those states and cities should be punished somewhere, some way, somehow. And I would furthermore say that those police that choose to do the right thing and to support the federal law enforcement officers in the performance of their duties, that those police are not permitted to be punished in any way, shape, or form by the state or local governments. Because I think that would do exactly what you indicated. The local police want to help the ICE officers and the FBI and those other people because they're all like-minded people, man. They all want to, and the truth is that these guys locally recognize and understand if they get that unsavory element off the streets, it's going to be safer for their neighborhoods, the ones that they're responsible for. So I think generally the police want to do it, but it's hard to do that when the mayor of your city says, if you cooperate with the with ICE or you cooperate with the FBI, you're going to be fired. I mean, people have to worry about their families, right?
Yeah, that's always the problem. Uh, a lot of people would stand up if they didn't put their jobs at jeopardy. But yeah, it's interesting. I always understood that Washington D.C. was under a different, you know,
Right.
jurisdiction. However, there are federal buildings in these large cities. And that's the
Yeah.
particular reason that you can deploy National Guard troops to protect federal facilities. And
Right.
you can also send as many federal agents into a city because, the city is not exempt from having the federal oversight when it comes to law enforcement on immigration.
Right.
So, because it's enumerated, to the federal government instead of the state, gives them the power to use the federal government if that city won't cooperate. It's almost like it's a mini civil war.
Right.
So you send in the federal troops and you say, okay, you can have your police department, but because you won't cooperate in this area, we're going to send in 2,000 National Guard and we're going to start rounding people up that you won't cooperate with us on because, sure, it's in our jurisdiction. And, the federal government pays for 90% of the Guard and Reserve. Well, the
Right.
Guard,
Right.
100% of the Reserve. States only have about 10% in it. So, they can't really, the states can't really complain.
Yeah. I'm not disputing or I agree with everything you've said. The problem that I think that limits certain police officers from assisting our federal agencies is that these local jurisdictions, sometimes it's the governor, but usually it's the mayor that says, Mr. Patrolman or Mr. Police Officer or Mrs. Police Officer, you will not help ICE. And many times, if the cities learn that ICE is going to be performing enforcement, they tell the illegals get out of Dodge because they're coming.
Yeah, well, the other thing is the detainers. That's the big thing. The left keeps saying, oh, we want less violence in our communities. But by not obeying or cooperating, should I say,
Mm-hmm.
with a federal detainer on an illegal immigrant, now you're sending the federal agents into the community where it's more dangerous to apprehend the person than if they just pick them up at the jail. I mean, I would be all in favor of seeing federal agents assigned to every police precinct. So when they bring in a criminal who's an illegal alien, okay, you don't have to obey or cooperate with the detainer. But since we're here and we see him too, we're just going to take him off your hands. I think that might be a solution.
Well, again, however they do it, I think that the federal government needs to put into place some sort of punitive, action if cities and states refuse or worse, impede the federal law enforcement officers from doing their job. And right now, that does not exist.
Yeah, well, like you said, impeding is the key word. And I think that's where it's going to come down to the federal law enforcement prosecuting mayors and others who stand in the way. You cannot impede the federal government from doing its job. That in
Right.
itself is a crime. You can,
But they are
you
doing
can,
it. They
you
are
can,
doing it, Mike.
they are, and they,
Officers
and they
are.
need to start cooperate or either cooperate or get prosecuted. Now, I think there's a fine line in the law between refusing to cooperate and impeding. So,
Right.
they'd
Right.
have to figure out where that line is under the
Well,
law.
if the local police or the what I'll call the leaders of the police departments, the lieutenants, the captains, the police chiefs, those typically are influenced by politics. When they put out the word in certain neighborhoods, hey, ICE is going to be running through, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Avenue from 9th to 17th Street. Get out of town before Monday. That I think that's impeding, right? But you may look at it different. I don't know.
I don't know. That's not for me to decide. That's for a bunch of lawyers and judges. That's for the Supreme Court or legislatures to decide. Again, I haven't researched it enough. If I was on a committee, I'd have to do my due diligence, but I'm not on a committee to study that.
Well, I again, when you look at everything Trump has done in the past week, I think again he's had another terrific week. He came to an agreement with the EU on tariffs, and I think that was a good thing for all of us. So the other thing is, again, still I don't understand this idea of the equity stake in chip manufacturers, but for Thursday or Friday he announced grants, federal government grants to Intel in the amount of $8.9 billion. And somehow, what they intend to do with that CHIPS grant is for the American public, that is represented by the American government, to get an equity stake in Intel. To my knowledge, Mike, that has never been done before. I mean, we've given tax breaks and equity, we've done all kinds of things to stimulate economic activity, but prove me wrong, and I know you'll do the research, but I don't think the United States of America has ever gotten an equity stake in a private company in exchange for that kind of economic development funding. If they did, I don't know, maybe during World War II. At one point in time in World War II, the Ford factories were turning out a B-24, B-17 bomber every hour. And every hour of every day they were sending I don't remember it was B-17 or B-20. Every hour they were sending a bomber to the military. Do you know how incredible that is? I mean, I don't think we got part of Ford equity in Ford Motor Company though when we
No,
did.
yeah, I don't think that's ever been the case before. All I was saying is there have been public-private partnerships. And
Yes.
this is a difference. This is a nuanced change to that. Yes, it goes beyond what we would normally consider. I think it's an interesting new idea. But with that, we got a minute and 40 seconds if you want to close out with any of your thoughts.
Well, I'm just saying, Donald Trump was inaugurated in January. Okay, this is August, so let's call it 8 months. Have you ever, in your adult life, seen any presidential administration accomplish more than this administration has accomplished in 8 months? And we're not even talking about the accomplishments of the last several months. This is what happened this week. That's what's so amazing about. And you know, Donald Trump has this amazing ability to compartmentalize all these different things. Where who would have thought of punishing India for buying Russian oil because they're using the money from India that's giving to Russia to buy oil to promulgate the war in Ukraine. I mean, the linkage there is unmistakable, and it makes sense. But who but Donald Trump would think about punishing a secondary country for what they want to get accomplished? Those are thinking outside the box ideas that no other administration has done, Mike. And I'm just impressed as hell. Whether you love Donald Trump or hate him, whether you hate those tweets at 2 a.m., or whether you think that he talks in third person to irritate you, the guy's been successful. And you got to grant him that. I mean, you got to give him a pat on the back for the success he's had.
Yep. Well, Mac and Mike out.